'Twas brillig and the slithy toads did gyre and gimble in the wave. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the mumraths outgrabe. Truer words have never been spoken. It's time to turn the wild beyond the Witchlight into a right and proper Mystara adventure. Like my other conversions, this is not a true review, though I will provide my thoughts on the module as a whole. The point is, as always, to remove monsters that you wouldn't fit in Mystara normally, and replace them with monsters that are a better fit. This is made a bit trickier because most of the module is set in the Feywild, which of course is the inferior cousin of the Good Kingdom. But enough explanation. Time for a frabjous day. I'm Mr. Welch, and let's get galumphing. To set the tone, this module starts at level 1, because all 5th edition modules start at level 1. It goes up to about level 8 or so. You're not going to get to epic level on this one. It's filled with Easter eggs and member berries. That's actually one of the flaws that I will explain later. I don't mind a shout out, but try and get the nostalgia right. It's a bit silly in places. Reminds me a lot of Castle Caldwell and beyond as far as the target audience. This module is for the wee ones. More experienced players might find it a bit sappy, especially with some of the early hand-holding. Kids are going to have a lot more fun with this module than older players. That's not a bad thing, but you have to play to the target audience, so just a suggestion. Please note this video is for Dungeon Masters. I'm not going to be hiding any spoilers. If you're looking for the monsters that I suggest you use for replacements, they can be found at the Vaults of Pandios, already converted, though you may want to tweak them a little bit further. If you can find a copy of the module Queen's Harvest, this conversion does reference that module heavily. There's a PDF of it for $5 at the Guild. It's not important to the final plot, but it will explain a lot of what I'm going to talk about. Enough with the build-up. It's time to jump in. But just remember, acting before knowing takes you right off the cliff. The book gives you 2 hooks to get started. Either the Carnival stole something from the players at a young age, or someone is hiring you to find out where his patron is. You can go with either one, though for the sake of continuity, change the Warlock's quest to finding one of the MacGuffins. Or even better, Strongheart the Paladin Squire wants you to find him because he's been missing for a while. You might recognize Strongheart from the module quest for the Heartstone, or the toy line. He's the future king of Irendi, so he does actually have ties to Mystara. And that's actual canon, it's not a conversion. He gets barely a cameo in this book, but it is a hook for an established character that you're going to run into. You get the characters to the Carnival. They pay to get in, and then they get some toy fairy wings to walk around with. There's a lot of games and a few mysteries to solve, but there's no real danger. Veteran players are going to get bored with this part of the game real quick, because there's nothing but just random skill checks. Though they might try to stick around and win some of the minor magical prizes. There's a thieving kinku you have to thwart, like there's any other kind of kinku in these adventures. A better substitute for the kinku in Mystara is a tabby, since they also have a larcenous bent. Plus they cast spells, which makes them even trickier to find. The 2 owners of the Carnival need a little tweaking, as Shadukar are not something you find in Mystara, especially since outsiders have a bad habit of standing out like Justin Bieber at a Cannibal Corpse concert. I have 3 options. First up is making them actual Shadow Elves, but that one's problematic as Shadow Elves are the secret race, plus everybody's just going to assume they're from Minrathad. Second, and the safest, is to make them She. It's a Carnival from the Good Kingdom, so that makes perfect sense. Third option is a little bit harder to roleplay, but it brings out the gonzo nature of the setting, and it makes them completely off the wall. Mr. Witch becomes a free-willed Magan. For kicks, making him a Galvan Magan, so he occasionally arcs electricity. Nothing harmful, but it just adds color. Mr. Bright becomes a Wooddrake, the shape-shifting, anarchy-loving fey creatures that can turn into an elf, a halfling, or a dragon-like creature. For kicks, you can have him assume all 3 forms to meet and watch the party, and they won't realize that they're all the same person. You keep the personalities the same, but this gives you humanoid NPCs that are more than a little bit off, but no one at the Carnival considers them odd at all. The first part of the adventure is there to give your players a little background into the Carnival, as well as to level them up to the point where the adventure actually starts, which is another annoying aspect of 5e. There is little danger in the first part. It's all exposition, and that might thrill newer players, but a veteran player will get the info, any treasure they can earn, and then bugger off to the next level. There's a subplot that if the Carnival ever meets its darker twin that's currently farting around in the domains of dread, the owners have to swap carnivals. But that subplot's never brought up again. The game strongly suggests milestone leveling up, but it's your game, your rules. Anyways, on to the actual part of the adventure. The base goal of the adventure is that the Fey realm of Prismere has been taken over by 3 hags and has been divided between them. You have to go to each of the 3 regions, called Hither, Thither, and Yon, defeat the hags, and then go free the Fairy Queen. To do this, you need to find the various MacGuffins that will free her from her fate. It's a scavenger hunt. Again, the module reads like it's for younger players. Run it for your kids and everybody will have a good time. Run it for older players and they will more than likely spot all the tropes and exploit them. Noticing recycled plots, puzzles, and stories isn't metagaming. It means the authors might want to try and branch out a bit. Especially with an adventure that has a ton of nostalgia like this one, even if it seems out of place. I couldn't tell you how many times I had to bite my tongue listening to a DM recite a puzzle I've already heard dozens of times, because I wanted him to feel like he's trying. Granted, the last time I came up with an original puzzle, it took the players about a minute to figure out the answer was ytterbium. My point being, don't make puzzles about the atomic weight of the periodic table of elements when you've got a pair of chemical engineers sitting at the table. First up is Hither, and it's a swampy morass. There's a lot of rabbit folk around, called the Herengon, and it's up to you to decide whether your game has them, or if there's already been enough furry types to satisfy you. Or you could be one of the DMs who has discovered that these things have a lot of rules issues and will use something else. I haven't run them through Theory Hammer yet, but I've seen enough videos that mention they have a few exploits. If you want to replace them, switch them out with various she. This is their home turf, after all. There's a few set encounters in Hither. One minor switch for the game is to replace the animated armor that pops in frequently in the adventure with either animated statues, or for a real kick, a silver warrior. You know, the Fae-created constructs. Though the natural invisibility might be too much for low-level parties, it's still very much a fairy thing to have to fight an invisible knight. The party will soon reach Sir Talavar, which is similar in nature to Sir Didymus in Labyrinth. He's an emissary of the Fae Court, specifically Titania. A side note regarding Titania, this is the Good Kingdom. There should be one impossible thing out of almost every encounter, even if it's just in the background. If the players arrive in Hither, let them see Titania's castle in the distance. Every room, hallway, and staircase flies around separately like a tornado of different parts. When somebody wants to walk from one room to another, the two rooms automatically connect to each other, then fly apart as soon as you cross over. It can't be reached in this adventure, but it was a unique idea from a game session that always stuck with me. You always want to have a huge sense of wonder if you're any place in the Good Kingdom. But again, your game, your rules. The party's going to meet Jingle Jangle the Goblin. I suggest replacing all the prime creatures they meet with Fae equivalents. This is where the Fae creatures are going to shine, and you need to make them appear as often as possible. A goblin stuck in the Good Kingdom is okay, but making her a brownie reminds you where you are. You will face a lot of bullywugs, which happen to be in formal dress, reminiscent of Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. While bullywugs aren't typically a Mystaran creature, there's not an equivalent that fits in with this scenario, as the toad aspect is important to the story. Maybe fire newts. But you can stick with the bullywugs. The fight with the first hag is pretty run-of-the-mill, so there's no conversions necessary. Moving on to Thither, this appears as a decaying old forest. Again, replace prime creatures with Fae equivalents where available. This is the time where you want to show off Mystara's impressive collection of Fae creatures. You can do this with no explanation whatsoever. Have a Gakarak walk by without saying a word. If you want to scare the players or give them a shock, send the coach and bower hurtling down a path, with a headless coachman whipping the black horses as he rushes to some unknown destination. Move out of the way or take damage. That's the encounter. Just a random death coach who can't slow down or stop because of its mission. It's never mentioned again and it's gone as fast as it appears. Keep your players on edge. When you get to the Hag's Lair, there's a box of dragon wormlings that you can fill with pocket dragons instead, as they're a lot more fun, plus they aren't going to get any bigger and like to be adopted as pets. This is where the players get their first good look at the secret villain of the adventure, so I might as well spoil this now. It's Tasha from Greyhawk, Igwilv. Only instead of being the legendary mother of demons and one of the most iconic villains in all of D&D, here she's been changed to an archfey and is no longer evil. That's boring. Plus, I'm not going to take a character from Greyhawk when there's a far better Mystara character available. So replacing Tasha for this adventure, as the ultimate surprise reveal, is Ilyana Penhaligon, the bandit queen from Queen's Harvest. She was never a nice person, but she grew in power when she discovered a magical intelligent sword that gave her all sorts of powers. Of course, the sword is of Fae origin, and Ilyana begins to fall under the sway of the unseelie Archfey. Perhaps the Archfey is polymorphed as part of a punishment, and the sword is her new form. Stealing from the Vaults of Pandios, the evil Archfey is Enhaladin, and she was using Ilyana as her meat puppet, and nobody knows that. If you have characters from Karamikos, they can recognize her as Ilyana, but the lore behind who she really is has to be revealed through the course of play. So that's the final boss now, a possessed Ilyana Penhaligon. And that, my friends, is how you do a callback. You're going to find Elkhorn the dwarf in this part of the module. The dwarf from the toy line. That dwarf. The one that appeared in Quest for the Heartstone. He's the first of 10 characters from the toy line to appear in the book, and to be honest, I have no idea why he's here, or why any of them are here. It's meant to stir nostalgia, but they're barely in the adventure. Unlike Heartstone, he's an NPC rather than a playable character. He's much more powerful than the PCs at this point, and he has no connection to the players. He doesn't have a connection to the old players either. I realize that they're force-feeding the old players member berries by including these guys, but there's not a lot of nostalgia for the Toyline's backbenchers. When it came to the Toyline, we remembered Strongheart, Warduke, and maybe some of the wizards. But good luck remembering anybody's name outside of Strongheart, because he was the headliner, and Warduke, because he was in the cartoon, as possibly the most competent villain in Saturday morning cartoon history. Plus, we loved his bitchin' winged helm, because it went along with his Camaro. But then they race-flip Molliver and give her plural pronouns, which makes no sense because the purpose of nostalgia is to show us the part of our past that we missed. This feels more like pandering. On a side note, I was disappointed they didn't include Melf the Elf. Yeah, the same guy that gave us Melf's acid arrows. Regardless of my thoughts about the differences between nostalgia and pandering, this guy's backstory was actually interesting. That wasn't originally his name, but the filler text for the toys were just the race, prefaced by either M or F to determine their sex. So Melf literally meant male elf, and they went to print with that mistake. Granted, looking back at the toys, you will realize that sometimes you've got the nostalgia goggles on too tight. Because the first thing you notice about the toys is they've got lifeless eyes. Black eyes, like a doll's eyes. And when that toy comes at you, it doesn't seem to be living till he bites you. Then those black eyes roll over to white and... Wait, hold on. Where was I? Oh yeah, Hither. Turns out there's not much more to this section outside of fighting the hag. Though there is an ad for Domains of Delight, which gives you the rules for the giant book-reading spider, which you have to buy for $8. It's for charity, so if there's any players listening, just start stabbing the spider immediately when you see it reading to the small furry animals. If you're good aligned, then the DM has to go out and buy the DLC, which benefits the charity. If you're evil aligned, then you get to slaughter a friendly spider right in front of all those cute furry little animals. It's a win-win situation no matter what. Yon is a mountainous region with defined paths. It's a bit of a railroad, but not enough to make the players feel herded. When there's only one path, there's only one direction. There's not much to do in Yon except for a few minor encounters until you get to Hag's Lair, which is a theater with lots of various NPCs to interact with. The point of the theater is it's been collecting people from across the multiverse. There's characters from every major old setting except Dark Sun and Birthright, and I might have just missed those. For some of the NPCs, the party is going to be experiencing certain humanoids for the very first time, like a tiefling. Play up her demonic appearance, the stench of evil, and the sinister countenance, and then remind them that she seems like a nice person. There's a lot of goblins you can replace with evil fae like imps. Goblins aren't a danger at all to the party at this level, so the change is mostly to focus on the fae of the setting. Again, you don't have to change anything about the boss battle at the end. But then you move on to the final act, the showdown with Ilyana, or more like the fae posing as Ilyana. There's not a lot of combat in this area. Most of the monsters are actually far below the character's level at this point. There's a few riddles and such. Most of the riddles in this module are pretty easy, so replace them if you need to. They might be tricky for younger players, but older players will recognize them from previous games often enough. Change the Slod you encounter into a nightmare creature, and the Lamia sent by Grazit can be replaced by evil Fae creatures sent by a rival Archfey who are investigating reports that Anhaladen has somehow gotten out of the Good Kingdom and is raising havoc in the Prime. You will encounter both Strongheart and Warduke and some of the other Toyline NPCs late in this adventure, though by the time you get to them, the adventure's almost over. Finally, you get to Ilyana, get the chance to get the sword away from her, destroy the cauldron with the MacGuffin, game over. Granted, she's not a hag like Igwil, so you can make the cauldron whatever you'd like. Players smash the cauldron, win the game, yay, time to go take your players to Mr. Gaddy's for pizza. Okay, that was a bit harsh. It's not a bad module despite my criticisms. Modules like this have their place. If it gets young people interested in an old hobby, so much the better. I wish the module had a bit more wonder in it, and definitely more Fae. The Easter eggs felt more like pandering after all. They were definitely targeting the grognards like me. A new player is not going to laugh at Fako the clown after all, they won't get the reference. And they definitely will not understand who the Toyline characters are supposed to be. Again, it's way before their time. The module seems to fluctuate between Alice in Wonderland and fairy tales. And I think that's largely due to the fact that there's different writers writing each chapter. But definitely ramp up the sense of wonder for the younger players, and you will be able to make them smile. And bonus points if you can make them smile while the Blink Dogs tear apart the Displacer Beast Cub. But until next time, remember, a little nonsense now and then is treasured by the wisest men.